The Jetsons, 1963, issue 22. First, there's a page where George drives his family to a Martian picnic area. Why would there ever even be an arrow sign pointing to Mars when Mars is the closest planet to Earth and we all know what it looks like? And there isn't anything in the way between it and Earth other than potentially the Sun. It'd make more sense if it was a different Mars. George says Jane forgot the picnic basket, and she brings food capsules out of her purse, even though it's not the same. In the first story, George is trying to drive home, and it looks like missiles are heading past his car. And I like his response to it. Jane calls him on the video phone on his car's dashboard, telling him to come in on the south part of the house. I knew there was a screen on it. Of course, being able to have a video call while you're driving doesn't seem realistic because it'd be very distracting. Already it's illegal to talk on a phone while driving. Maybe you hired a hacker to make him able to do that, or at least Elroy. Rosie's sending out missile message invitations for a family reunion. George questions this because robots don't have families. But after spending all of that time with humans, robots that think like them would be jealous of their having families, and want to try to form families of their own if they have the time. So if Rosie can track down other people made in the same factory as her, those would be her siblings, and the maker of that factory would be her father. The point is, George shouldn't have said that if he's known Rosie this long, and grown up in a society full of robots, because this would have come up much earlier. He could have seen it on TV at least. I was right, it's a family reunion for the robots turned out at the robot factory. And to be even more specific, for no reason, it's for all the robots with the same batch serial number as Rosie. Why have batch serial numbers? The whole point of a serial number is to have a completely unique identifier. Now if she had a second serial number that was unique to her, like an earlier issue, I'd understand. This is like if Bender had a family reunion with all the other Bender units you could find. Rosie says it'll be fun to find out what jobs the others landed. You mean robots aren't assigned to their job at creation? I thought she was made specifically to be a maid bot. In this issue, all robots can choose to get skilled at whatever job they want. They'd have to have the proper education downloaded into them to catch up with humans competing in the job market. Even then, I think a lot of employers would refuse to hire them over humans. It cuts ahead to the big night, where a few of the robots go to the house by saucer taxi. It'd sure suck if there were too many robots produced, and they couldn't all fit in George's house. I guess she knows what she's doing. We see one of the robots fly over to Rosie, and she knows her by name. Who would name a robot Tootsie? On the other hand, what robot would call herself that? She's the messenger girl for interplanetary saucer parts. And Rosie says that's nice. George sees the other robots mention much more boring jobs, and they should hear Jane when she calls them cute beside him. They aren't cute in appearance, so she's just being condescending because they aren't humans. They must be used to forgetting this. George doesn't like the sound of a loud space horn, and Rosie complains that rogue robots arrived. I don't understand why Rosie invited him just because they're technically family when she hates him for good reason. Why be nice to him over all of the other people in the party who she'd be annoying by inviting him? It's so silly when a character does something based on honor before reason, and it's more dishonorable than anything by only benefiting one person. She sees Rogue Robot has a human chauffeur and a human aide pushing a button to open the back door of the house while talking like he was hypnotized. Which I hope will be explained, because this never happens. Why isn't Rogue Robot in jail instead of rich enough to hire these two? Robots that break the law wouldn't be let out of jail. Not without being reprogrammed with no one minding because they're robots. Rogue says he doesn't have a job, and he has humans working for him. He explains that there's a hypnotic pill, and I hope he'll learn who made it, because unless it's his mad scientist friend from an earlier issue, it seems too convenient that it exists. He advises the other robots to try it as well, making me think that the only thing standing between this world and a dystopia where every robot has his advantage is the rareness of the pills. I wonder why a criminal called Rogue Robot is even considering helping the other robots by supplying them with these, unless he cares about only members of his family. Tucci asks Rosie what she thinks instead of being horrified at him, so she doesn't entirely mind. She's just in conflict. Rosie actually considers it. She seems to only object because her masters treat her very well. It's weird that in a society where robots can choose whatever career or live without one without being dismantled, robots still use the term master and nobody objects to it. They don't feel oppressed by and prefer to use the term employers for some reason. They must be programmed to be okay with it. George would be talking right next to Rosie. George has a smart plan to suck up to Rosie, and Jane agrees that they should impress the robots. It's tilted that she says favorably. That's redundant. George puts a scarf on Rosie, who thanks him. Jane hands out oil snacks on a silver platter for Rosie and her friends. By saying friends instead of family, she makes it obvious she doesn't consider them a real family. So it's polite that none of the robots call her out on it. They're all used to the fact that the robots and humans have a slightly different culture. Elroy runs up to her and doesn't entirely help matters by still admitting in front of her friends that he called her a bucket of bolts. He still takes it back, so she calls him sweet anyways. Astro fetches Rosie's snow tire for her, and she says he really thinks ahead because it's June. A kind of funny line. She tells her siblings to ignore Rogue because humans are a robot's best friend and they tell him to leave. He tells his driver to go to the robot factory. So George worries that he's going to reprogram the robots there, which he'd only be able to do if he got info on how to reprogram robots from a robot education place for getting them hired. George decides to drive after him, as if he could beat him there without a head start. He says he already disabled the Night Watch robots, meaning they aren't very good at their job if any robot can do that. George at least realizes punching Rogue would hurt, and sees a bunch of robots go ahead behind him, who are told to follow his example. Jane whispers to George to unplug Rogue's hot wire, like that'd be easy. While Rogue grabs him, Elroy goes behind him, but he should know better than to say he'll open his hatch instead of do it. Especially when there's a robot behind him, though he would have been grabbed anyways. It's very smart of Jane to run off, saying there's no sense in her joining the parade and driving away. And it's also smart of her to reassure them that she has an idea. Rogue smashes a window and encourages the others to do the same. And that makes George think civilization would get destroyed by just a small army of robots somehow. Really, this scenario would never happen again if all society did was ban robots from learning how to reprogram robots. Rogue and his army get told to stay put, and George sees multiples of Rogue, and one of them tells the others to do as he says. Except the robots would know it's not Rogue because he's right there. And it's not like they have very simple programming. They talk, and are just as capable as humans. This should only work if the other Rogue units tackled him, and they couldn't tell which one was the original anymore. The new robots follow their orders perfectly fine, and it turns out they're just Rosie and her guests. But no explanation is really given about how they impersonated Rogue. There's no mention of how the reprogramming was done though, and they're not going to spend the rest of their lives looking like Rogue. They must have contacted the robot factory company to fix them later. We see Rogue get swept away by a broom that doesn't get drawn, impacting him sadly. His hypnosis pills get sent upwards, and George swallows one by accident, even though you have to make an effort to swallow, so he would have just spit it out, unless merely having it in his mouth magically hypnotizes them into swallowing it. At first there seems to be a lesson to trust Rosie more, but the story still ends with him being her servant while dressed like a maid, with Rosie lying on a chair. Thinking this is fun. She says it'll be just for tonight at least, and tells them to fetch her curlers. Whatever she'd even do with them. And it's only good that Elroy and Jane are smiling because it makes for less of a needlessly bleak ending. because it's already going for comedic sociopathy as it is. But I like that it's a realistic ending. It goes off the fact that she even considered doing this in the first place. In the next story, Astro's hovering dog bed zaps the cat bed of a cat, and Elroy congratulates him for giving the cat a taste of its own medicine instead of scolding him. And we'd have more reason to agree with him instead of see them as jerks if we saw the cat zap him first. And I'm wondering why cat and dog beds are able to zap in the first place, because humans wouldn't want them to be doing that. He instantly worries that Astro caught a flea from that cat just because he scratched himself one time, because he cares, and throws a bone to reward him. The dog bed has a bone radar automatically do its stuff, and it comes back with a bone. He tells Astro to bury it with a shovel from the dog bed. Always happy to see the dog bed emit a smoke screen to keep the dog catcher from harassing him for his operator's license, which it's doing to a dog for no reason. Then the dog bed breaks, and Elroy's too young to fix it. And George says it's expensive to buy the new parts. He complains that last month, something else in it broke. He complains that when he was a boy, dogs only had a sweater. And Astro howls, and Elroy magically realizes it's because he has an itch, and knows exactly where it is to scratch it. George tells him not to lower himself to do that, and wants to teach Astro to act like a dog again. Why should I care when the comic always keeps the status quo? George shows Astro how to scratch his fleas, and someone driving by just has to see him. Luckily he's not in the next panel where Astro runs away scared of a cat in a cat bed. George pities him for not knowing how to deal with the cat even though cat beds can zap him. He knows how to chase a cat robot. He shows Astro how to scare a cat in front of someone, and someone doesn't mind his own business as the dog catcher got called on George. Obviously just to prank him, because nobody would think he's actually a dog. Why would the call say a dog acting like a man, or someone else didn't mind her own business, because she called a doctor in a van with a red cross on it, and we see dust get thrown up as George gets attacked. And Elroy tells Jane she has to pick him up at the police station. I'd hope that a future like this would have cures for everything, not happy farms. This is a bad story. George gives up on trying to teach Astro, and decides to buy Astro the most up-to-date equipment. And the story ends with him in a pool under a sun lamp, with Astro's automatic doghouse in it, which has a video phone for another dog trying to call Astro, and sends out bones. And I don't see why his family's judging him, because he's still relaxing in a personal swimming pool like a lot of people. So what if he happens to be near a dog like a lot of people with dogs are? Then there's a page where George looks through a telescope in his house and sees a whole new system of planets. But then Rosie dusts the lens and says he was only looking at dust. He should have known better than to assume he saw hundreds of planets at once and for the first time. They'd all crashed into each other from gravity. And then there's a page where he puts his car into automatic, only for it to force him to go to the gas station and tell him he's stupid for not buying fuel. It wouldn't be rude about it. He would have had to put in the route, and he'd have to follow it, or they'd have cars going rogue. In the next story, for once Elroy interacts with Judy saying she's trying to be a satellite around their lamp, which doesn't look like a lamp. She's mad that her date's always late, and Elroy puts faith in him thinking he forgot about the time, like he knows him. She turns on her diary on tape, and records herself saying she'll run away to the moon's moon if her boyfriend's late for one more date. Why does she lie in her diary? Why is her diary right there, easy for her boyfriend to use, complete with being labeled? At least the diary doesn't have a chain smoker voice like in that one episode. He's happy to use it and calls her my sweetie, revealing that he thinks he really cares about her. Elroy's worried too, and he drives away to rescue her. Judy at least heard Elroy talking to someone, even if she somehow didn't know it was Zip. Why do they make a different character every time if it's always the same name? Judy decides to go to the moon's moon with Elroy because even in the future she thinks she'd feel better with a guy aboard, despite his young age. And it turns out there really is a moon for the moon, with constantly erupting volcanoes, just because it's the future. It'd have to be an artificial moon. You'd think it'd be attracted to it from its gravity and crash into it. A witch must have just created it. At least I never saw this before. So Judy's boyfriend gets scared by a white lava eruption that melts his car's tail section, meaning it's got no power and crashes. It doesn't open for Judy, but something's still in the car from the last picnic. And Elroy uses a bat to hit a ball through his air dome. As I start thinking a terraforming machine has to be a constant presence on this moon to make it breathable. Judy calls Elroy a genius for the obvious solution, as if she doesn't already know he's a genius. And the story ends with them all having Sundays. It sure was generous of them to take Elroy with them on their date, just because it was his idea to go. I feel like Judy should have been called out and punished for causing this whole mess by lying to her diary for no reason, when she should know diaries are really easy to find, even if he shouldn't have listened to it. In the next story, the family gets a telegram from George's uncle, and George assumes he wants to borrow more money. And the family reminisces about what he tends to borrow money for, and Jane had to nurse him back to health from moon dust poisoning. Why her and not a real nurse? Logically, they should change phone numbers on him if he causes them nothing but trouble. But go figure it's different this time because he struck it rich. It's only interesting because it's the future. So he went to another planet to look for sunken treasure. Let me guess. He'll be pretending to be rich the whole story. Eventually it turns out a pirates intercepted their uncle's telegram. The whole family hugs George's uncle, and he says he hasn't been kissed so much since he was a baby. Elroy carries his bag, and George tells him to sit in his automatically rocketing chair with a back scratcher. They're manipulating, but it's still a bunch of good deeds anyways. George wants to suck up to him by getting him real cooking instead of pills, but it backfires because Jane and Judy have no idea how to cook. Thankfully it cuts ahead with them being served delicious cooking thanks to Rosie, so it wasn't depressing. And somehow, even Astro knows to suck up to him, so he brings him slippers. The uncle wants to repay them, and Elroy hands him his bag. He tries to give Jane a gift, and says he had tons of lovely gems in his bag, but now it's a wet string. He's shocked to find out that the whole bag of jewels became liquid. He must have been to a planet he'd have to wear a spacesuit on, and even says so. He went to a planet that was extremely cold and utter darkness. He should have used his brain. A pirate runs into their house, which sure is a downside to anybody being able to enter their house for no reason. At least how people use lockpicks every time. And the uncle knows his name. He's just that infamous. Elroy splashes them with the liquid jewels, which gets the pirate electrocuted. Elroy and George smile, and they think he's just out cold. And the cop thanks them and hands the uncle a bag of money, which he fortunately gives to George. He thanks him, but sadly borrows the reward to buy rocket fuel to go interplanetary reward hunting. We didn't need this ending, but I understand the writer wanted to make it more believable, because without an explanation for why the uncle would change, I was wondering why he did. He could have easily explained it by saying he was at the hospital and no one visited him. Alf got away with that. I hate that he was written to steal all of the reward instead of just some of it. Why'd he even bother giving him the reward then? Maybe he didn't realize how expensive the rocket fuel would be. And then there's a page where Rosie buys a fishing pole and magnet, and uses the magnet on the fishing pole to fish up a robot fish, which had no reason to be in the scene. Someone says now he's seen everything, so if the writer knew it was confusingly weird, why not try to explain it? The first story is about Rogue Robot telling Rosie and her siblings they should use hypnosis pills on humans at her family reunion. George tries to stop him from reprogramming the robots at a factory into being his army without the means to stop him, or a plan, and Jane should have known this would backfire and stayed home. But either way, she does get Rosie and her guests to impersonate Rogue and get the robots to be useful instead. It's disappointing that it was never explained how Rogue had those convenient pills, or how Rosie's guests were able to look just like Rogue on short notice without being able to shapeshift. But I appreciate how epic it was that Rogue the robot came back to be a major villain for the final issue. But it would have been cooler if it was Bella instead. The second story gets needlessly depressing after the first scene, because after it has George try to teach Astro how to be a good dog, because he was too reliant on his dog bed, to the point where he teaches him how to chase a cat, even though he knew how to do that in the show, people don't mind their own business and go out of their way to waste their time calling people to bother him, ruining what could have been just a funny scene. And he has to get picked up from jail. It even undermines the happy ending. The third story is Judy lied to her diary for no reason out of stress, and when her boyfriend listens to it, because she made no effort to hide it, he believes her lie, and she has to go to the moon's moon to save him from his attempt to rescue her. I like how much he really cared about her. And the moon's moon is a creative idea. His car crashes because it gets hit by a lava eruption, and Elroy breaks the air dome with a baseball to get him free and saves him. And I'm forced to assume this moon has a machine on it to make it survivable for humans. The last story is about George's family sucking up to a visiting uncle because he sent them a telegram that he's rich that a pirate intercepted. It's at least interesting that the jewels he got melted because they were brought to Earth. I like that's not as predictable as possible. Rather than him not actually being rich, or losing all of his wealth, he was rich until he went to Earth. Elroy throws the melted jewels at a thief to electrocute him, but the reward money did nothing but save George the money he'd have to pay his uncle to fund his next trip. It's really lame that he had to spend all of it. It's also disappointing that we never do see him give the family proper gifts to make up for the wet string bracelet. The issues after this are just reprints. So the next Jetsons comic is the Jetsons Charlton,